everyone. My name is Natalie Lavery, and I'm the marketing lead here at Climate People. I'm joined by Brendan Anderson and Lowell, who we recently just placed at a job at Lumen Energy. So thank you so much for joining us. Would you mind by starting out by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey getting a job in climate?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lowell. I live in Seattle and I grew up in West Los Angeles. Out of college, worked 5 years in a big tech company, and that really wasn't like the culture or values fit I was looking for. So a few months ago, I started looking for jobs in climate tech specifically, and someone referred me to Brendan because Brendan's the master of getting people into software climate tech jobs.
Definitely. So what inspired you to want to switch to climate tech? I know you said you weren't feeling inspired, but what was it about climate that piqued your interest?
Sure. Well, insofar as using my software skill set to solve problems, climate tech seemed to be one of the few things where software seemed like an appropriate solution as opposed to being like shoehorned in a lot of different industries. And that's really exciting. I'm like very, for better or for worse, very picky about what I work on. It's really important for what I do to feel like it's like the right thing to be doing and it's meaningful and like appropriate. And I feel like for climate tech, and specifically what I'm interested in, which is like accelerating the deployment of clean energy, it's like really appropriate. It's like the right tool for the job.
Definitely. Yeah. It's funny you say that. A lot of the software engineers we work with say, like, I didn't even know there was a space for software engineers in climate. So it's awesome that you not only see that, but see the direct role that that can play. Did you have that notion before you learned about these type of jobs, or did you already kind of see the space for engineers?
I think I probably like initially assumed that it was more of like a hard tech, deep tech problem. And so that I couldn't be of much help, especially because I like kind of just doing like web app stuff. And then also a lot of the stuff that was web appy seemed not as tangible as what I hoped for. A lot of like either like maybe carbon offset market or like helping policymakers, which seems kind of like very indirect. And so to like play a specific role in like this part of deployment is kind of like old and crafty and we can use software to smooth it along. Like, oh, that's, yeah, software does like automate things. That's great. So I definitely had the sense, even like broader, that there was just nothing I could do meaningful in tech beforehand. I was spent a lot of time like looking into like social work and stuff like that. Uh, but that's not nearly as playing to my skill set, and not as well compensated. It's not as flexible as software is.
No, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people have a similar trajectory of like, maybe I need to get out of tech. Maybe there isn't that good reward in tech, but there is, and you're the case in point of that. So that's awesome that you were able to apply that. Did you experience any barriers or hardships when you were looking for this job, or was it pretty easy for you?
Um, so I spent the last maybe like month or two looking for climate tech jobs, and that's before that, about 6 months ago, like right as I was quitting my old job, I was also looking around, and I think by virtue of not having as wide of an experience on what was out there, I think I was like settling for a lot of things that didn't quite check the box for me. Like there were some companies that were more like what we do will like probably like allow other people to have climate impact, and like this kind of thing is like an indirect effect. And I figured that that was kind of the best that I could do, which was disheartening. And the reason that I started my most recent stint is because specifically someone reached out that was they focus on like project management tooling, which seemed like for like deploying renewable energy projects, which is like both what I want to be doing and it seems like the job for software. And I guess also just like the broadness of the space is really challenging. There's even when it's like as narrow as like specifically software on climate tech, there's still like so many things to do, which is very overwhelming. I found that like quickly my like negative emotions shifted from like, oh, I hope I do a good job in interviews to like, there's so many things, there's so many like good things and like so many like thoughtful, like warm people. It's just like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And I found myself oftentimes like hoping that like all but one people would like drop me from their interview process just so I wouldn't have to pick. So it's like, it's a good problem to have, but it's still like, it's wide open. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We always say like there's if you don't know about climate jobs, they don't really seem like they're out there and you don't know much about them. But then once you dip your toes in the water and kind of start getting some of the resources, it's quickly becomes overwhelming. And that's honestly one of the main issues that we are facing is like all of these people, there are so many of these people that don't know about these jobs. And then how do we get them involved and show them? So yeah, it's really interesting that you did that. Did
And it's a
you?
lot of like piecing together too, like in terms of like there's like climate people and like work on climate and my climate journey, and you read like the drawdown review, and then there's like climate based, and just like it's not like a very straightforward like trajectory. So there's like a lot of resources, which is good, but it's not in like a super obvious form, which I had really like simplistic college understanding of like, oh, go work at a FAANG company, and that like really limits your options in kind of a helpful way. Whereas like climate tech, like so many possible things you could be doing.
Yeah. So how do we attract those people? And then once we attract them, give them that straight path into a climate job. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. So that's exciting. I know you mentioned some of like the Slack communities and the different organizations, but were there any other key resources that you found really helpful?
Yeah. So yeah, I mentioned work on climate and my climate journey, and I guess specifically within those is not just like obviously the community at large, but like people within those communities that are very supportive. Obviously, Brendan has been very supportive for me through the search. There's like both like the partners at my climate journey are very active in getting folks to find a job if they want a job. Um,
Yeah.
that's to start. Admittedly, some of this like kind of trails out. I worked with Single Sprout a little bit, which is more of like a broad like social impact thing that also has like some climate tech, but it's not their specific focus.
Yeah, those are all really great resources. I feel
Climate
like
Draft. There's so many different. Yeah.
yeah, it's one thing to be a part of them and like have them up, but to fully get the benefit of it, you really have to engage, which is kind of similar to the job application process. It's really about putting it in and going in full force to reap the benefits of it.
Yeah.
Could you touch a little bit on the job that you'll be taking and what you'll be doing?
Sure, I can try. I don't know that much because I start next week. But broadly, I'll be a software engineer at Lumen Energy, which is accelerating the deployment of renewable energy to commercial properties. Um, uh, and that's pretty much about as much as I know now. I know there's a lot of parts in that in terms of like it's hard to like get like credit ratings for like commercial property owners, which makes it more challenging than getting like loans for like smaller real estate. And there's like massive properties and a lot of capital like gets put in. There's like different like economic incentives. There's a lot of little layers that I'm sure software can make a lot easier.
Yeah, and what will your exact role be? Do you know much about that yet? Or should we
I think
ask
it's
you
just
again?
software engineer,
Okay.
which is what I prefer as the most. At least that's what my prior employer. No one had like iOS engineer or senior or whatever. It's just like I even just put software whenever there's an just to be like as short and like lowercase and cute as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about that like climate solution attracted you to the role?
I like there was this podcast interview of Emily Kirsch at Powerhouse who had some phrase of just like get out whatever we have now, and I definitely lean more in like the deployment rather than innovation side of things, which just plays to my personality of being very impatient. And so something that's like specifically focused on deploying stuff right now rather than like, oh, if we do research on this, then maybe we can like convince policymakers to down the, it's just like too many steps. And I just want to, so my like LinkedIn bio description of this role is put the solar panels on the buildings, which is just nice and pithy rather than like, we are a firm that invests in the innovation of the community. It's like, it's too many steps. Yeah.
Love the business lingo that makes it way more confusing than anyone else.
Honestly appreciated that with like working with Brendan, that like Brendan shared me some opportunities. I was like, oh, I kind of don't really know what this one's doing. And Brendan's like, oh yeah, well right now this process is really slow. And so like they're doing this work to make it faster. Like, oh yeah, they should say that. Why do these people have these things that I don't understand what they're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, it's wild.
That's why the industry of like climate communication even exists to translate what people are saying.
Yeah, and I gotta imagine, I don't know, I'm like a nerdy software engineer person. I imagine there's people who are even more like, I don't even know what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the barrier right there. We add that one to the list of having to decipher what some of this is saying.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So I know that you, and as you mentioned, you were battling between a few different offers. How was that journey for you? And like, what really was the deciding factor to take the job that you did?
Yeah, that was really tough. I think ultimately, uh, I think that the team size for Lumen is right for me right now. I think there's something like 25 or so according to LinkedIn, and the other places I was interviewing at were like 10 or fewer with like 0 or 1 engineers. And at least coming from a place that has thousands of engineers, any any number that's in the single digits will be a lot smaller. And I figured this would give me an opportunity to like, I really enjoy working with like at least a few number of people. I don't really want to be like someone who's can control everything. Um, so I figured that'd be a better fit for me. I generally also like B2B over B2C. I kind of get a gross feeling telling like consumers to spend more money because I personally try to not spend money. Um, and so I've been more comfortable being like, you own a lot of real estate and have a lot of money. Why don't you put some of that in like solar panels and then you can get returns on your investment? And that feels a lot more comfortable to me. Uh, and they all seem very like warm and thoughtful. Uh, yeah, and like the interview process was like I thought pretty smooth. Sometimes I go through an interview process and I felt like I wasn't like evaluated for what I have to offer, and that certainly wasn't the case with Lumen.
That's awesome. Those are all great things to look for in a job. So that's super exciting. Do you have any advice for like a similar software engineer or a software engineer that's in a similar boat when they're going through a process like this?
Yeah, I guess if you're in like my position, which is most of the people you know are very much not in climate tech. With a lot of people who my position is all your friends are software engineers who like hate their software engineering jobs, which isn't like really like a good like osmotic environment to have. So like I think the pithiest thing would be like find people. And so that's both like specific relationships like what I've had with Brendan, but also the folks that are really open to helping out with those aforementioned Slack communities of my climate journey and work on climate, and like joining whatever events feel appropriate, either virtually or in person. I've found to be really helpful for like ramping up into a space that I was pretty ignorant of like only a few months ago. And people are like really open to help, like totally like, outside of their job. Sometimes it makes more sense, like, oh, you're like a venture capital partner, you want people to join your thing. But there's some person like, oh, I'm just like VP of marketing at this totally other company, but like they'll just like tag me in roles that are a good fit. There's just like a really strong helping vibe. And I feel like leaning on that makes sense, especially if you don't already have those kind of connections. Um, yeah.
Definitely.
Do you think, Lowell, would you give different advice to people who weren't necessarily in your position where you obviously spent a lot of time on this? And so for the engineer who might be in a job and, you know, they're working 40 to 50 hours a week and they've got a family at home and they don't have the time to connect in these communities and to put that time in, do you have any advice or recommendations for those folks that maybe don't have the extra time that you did to spend that on the research and the networking and the community?
Yeah, I think probably the best bang for your buck in that situation, especially if you're like a software engineer looking for climate tech, would be like working with climate people that you're like distill down like these are people that are like hiring and I can put you directly in touch with the team and I like that sounds like a good fit based on what you've told me is I think like the most effective, and you like save a lot of time of not like looking through job postings and trying to understand if they're a good fit and stuff like that. I think that's like the most efficient. It's kind of like it's a lot more like white glove of a service of like I don't have that much time, can you find me a good fit? Is a lot better than spending a bunch of time pouring through. Even like the useful community stuff just takes a lot of time. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes finding a climate job so hard, because these jobs span across all sectors of the global economy. And yet you really, if you want to do a good job with it, you really need to know what you're looking for, which means you have to go and do the research. You have to spend time understanding the landscape and then being able to compare and contrast. First of all, understanding also what your value proposition is and like what are the solutions that really ultimately speak to you. Like you had very strong opinions about the kind of solutions that you want to be involved in solving, and therefore you really have to do that research versus if you're the type of person who's just generally open to different kinds of climate jobs and it's a little less important about what the exact solution is, you could probably get away with just applying to some jobs on climate based. But if you have stronger opinions about what you want to do, that's not necessarily going to be the way that you're ultimately going to find your way into the sector.
Absolutely. Right. I think that at least in like generally in my experience in like big tech, there's a lot of folks who really do not care about like I think you have kind of like a self-preservation mentality, and if you care too much about what you're actually doing, it doesn't feel good. So it's a lot more emphasis on just like I want to work with big data, machine learning, and kind of agnostic to like the actual impact of the work. But I think that when you're in climate tech, it like matters a lot more because there's like a substantial difference between like working with agriculture or like renewable energy or carbon capture or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Good
definitely.
stuff.
Yeah, work
What else
smart.
you got, Matt? Anything else?
Um, I think we can talk about our 1% for the Planet program. So I know you already sent us the email, but we want to say it live. So our 1% for the Planet program is essentially we donate 1% of every placement fee to an environmental nonprofit in your name. We sent over a few. Did you have a chance to look at them and see which one you want to send your donation to?
Yeah, I'd like the one that was surprise, surprise, accelerating the deployment of renewable energy. I don't remember the name.
Yeah, the Foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, they all seem really cool. So, yet another tough decision to make. But yeah,
give you all the tough decisions in the span of a few weeks.
right.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for doing that. And yeah, the Hanal Foundation is a great organization. So, yep, we see a lot of ties between people who take jobs in the energy sector tend to donate to the Hanal Foundation. So it makes sense for sure.
Yeah, not diversifying at all. Just all the eggs in one basket.
Okay. Put all your good deeds into one sector.
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I think that was all the questions we had for you. Unless Brendan, you had anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrapped up?
No, I'm good. I'm excited for you, Lowell. I know the Lumen team is really excited for you to come on board, and it's been amazing and awesome working with you. And I suspect that you and I will be having lots of conversations in the future. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Great to get to meet you and consider you a friend. So.
Oh, very much. The world needs more of y'all. This is like extremely important work. I don't know. I feel like even like more important than like the nitty gritty engineering work is like shuffling all these human folks out of like soul sucking careers into like very important, meaningful careers is like really, really good stuff.
Yeah, we love it. We enjoy it. So good stuff.